Perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the YRBiz Roadmap to Recovery webinar series. I'm Karen Dubois. I'm your MC for today's session, HR and Employment Law, What You Need to Know for the Next Phase. This series is a result of a great partnership between the Vaughan and Newmarket Chambers of Commerce and the region of York, and was really designed with one purpose in mind, which is to provide our businesses with the information and resources they need to help them through the reopening phases and as we transition to a new normal. I want to acknowledge the leadership of the partner organizations, Brian Schiffman, who couldn't be with us today from the Vaughan Chamber, Tracy Walter, President and CEO of the Newmarket Chamber of Commerce, Charles Banfield, and all the chamber leaders in York Region for their collaboration. It's only by working together that we can truly chart a path for recovery for our businesses. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Charles from the region of York to say a few words of welcome. Charles?
All right, thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Karen stated, my name is Charles Banfield, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Economic Initiatives at the Regional Municipality of York. Today's event is the fourth in a series of webinars that are designed to provide a roadmap to post-COVID economic recovery. And these webinars provide information and resources that can help businesses navigate the current economic environment and make the necessary adjustments to their operations, which will enable them to thrive in a post-COVID economy. As businesses across Ontario continue to adjust to phase 3 of reopening, they're faced with new challenges in managing employees and their operations. In these unprecedented times, businesses are faced with a number of issues, including recalling employees to work, adjusting wages and schedules, managing staff remotely, and among other items, or among other issues, sorry. This webinar will provide an overview of many of these issues and suggestions for addressing how to manage them. I wish to thank the Newmarket and Vaughan Chambers of Commerce, as well as the York Region Business Coalition, all who partner with us in developing and delivering this webinar series. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to today's presenters and to Karen Dubois for organizing this event today. Thank you all once again for joining us, and over to you, Karen.
Great, Charles. Thank you so much. And I have to say, I'm so pleased to announce we have a special surprise guest joining our session today. Rocco Rossi, who's the President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, is joining us. I'd like to invite Rocco to tell us and share with us about the Canada United campaign for small businesses.
Thank you so much, Karen, and big ups to my colleagues, Brian and Tracy, for doing phenomenal work in Vaughan and Newmarket, two of really our rock star chamber CEOs in the province, and to York Region for being really, really progressive and always being open, as we've been seeing at all levels of government and in all regions, really working together in these unprecedented times. And we should never take that for granted, because you only need to look south of the border to realize it's not automatic that everyone plays nice and make stuff happen. It's part of the reason we've done as well as we have on the public health side. No roadmap to recovery can happen without consumers coming back and cash registers ringing. As business people, none of us got into business to receive subsidy checks. That's for crisis. We want to make our money, earn our living, create opportunities for ourselves, our friends, our family, our neighborhoods, our communities, by providing amazing services, amazing products, and having consumers buy them. And so there have been lots of shop local campaigns sprouting out across the country, and all of them are good, all of them are important. We at the Ontario Chamber got extremely excited a little over a month ago, because over 50 major corporations, big businesses, came together with unity of purpose and understood that, as big as they are, the key to the Canadian economy, the Ontario economy, are small businesses. They are literally the backbone of the economy. And so they've said, look, it's time to show locals some love. And they got together with all of the chambers of commerce across the country to create Canada United. And it's been a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign, online, on television, on radio, that's going to continue right through to the end of August. And in addition to marketing and encouraging people to safely go back and buy local, dine local, explore local, celebrate local, every time someone has shared a story about their favorite restaurant, the place where they got the first job, the first date, where they celebrate their special occasions, where they buy that special something for their special someones, RBC and the partners have been kicking in 5 cents into a fund that now has already exceeded $2 million, which the Ontario Chamber of Commerce will be putting out grants of up to $5,000 for small businesses, qualifying businesses across the country to help defray the costs of PPE and other reopening costs for small business who've been so hard hit in all of this. And all of this is building to, as I said, the final weekend in August, 28th, 29th, 30th. And over 30 mayors and municipalities across the province, including Newmarket and Aurora, have officially proclaimed that weekend Canada United Weekend. And we're encouraging everyone to do something special with their business that weekend. And to spice things up, RBC is kicking in 25 cash prizes of $10,000 each for people who shop that weekend and then enter online. Cadillac Fairview is offering 50 shopping sprees of $5,000 to those who shop in the businesses in their malls on the same weekend. And there are lots of tools online at gocanadaunited.ca for small businesses to participate. Your local RBC branch will now have physical decals today, tomorrow, Monday, that you can put into your window saying you're participating in the program. And lots more information at gocanadaunited.ca. There's a special section there for small businesses. And of course, continue to light up social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, what have you, with hashtag Canada United, and let's build that fund even bigger to the benefit of all businesses across the country, including right here in York Region.
Wow, that's amazing, Rocco. So you've already exceeded the $2 million target. That's fantastic. And what a wonderful way of people being able to show their support for small businesses. And those cash prizes and the shopping sprees are amazing. I made notes because I want myself one of those. Thank you so much for the work that, the great work that the OCC and RBC and all of your partners are doing. It's really fantastic. And on behalf of all our businesses, thank you for all your efforts.
Well, we're delighted. And again, small business needs all of our business. And that's going to make an enormous impact. And in the meantime, as my dad likes to say, stay positive and test negative.
That's great. Thanks so much for being with us today, Rocco. It was really great to have you on.
Pleasure.
Great. So before we move on to our session, I'd like to just take a minute and talk about a few housekeeping issues. First of all, this session is being recorded. As we have our presenters talk about particular resources, as Rocco did, we'll be putting the links in the chat function. So don't worry about having to, madly write them down. We'll be making those links available to you in the chat function. That chat box, as well as Q&A, is open to use all throughout the session. We will have a Q&A at the end of all the presentations, but feel free to put the questions in beforehand, and myself and my colleague Tyler from the Newmarket Chamber will be gathering those questions and getting them ready for our panelists. Including, by the way, not just questions, but if you have a suggestion for a topic that you'd like to see the series addressed, just put the topic in the chat function and we take your direction on making sure the series is addressing your needs. After the event is finished, we will be sending out a follow-up email that will include copies of all the presentation slides from our presenters, as well as handouts if they had them. Throughout the session, you'll see a few snap polls pop up like this one that's in progress right now. And it's just a way of gaining some feedback from you. So I encourage you to participate. They'll be up for about a minute, 2 minutes, and then we'll close them and you'll see the results. And I did want to just make a statement. We have some amazing industry professionals on our panel today, but the information that they share is not intended to be legal advice. Every business is different, every situation is different with unique attributes. And so if you do have any particular issues you want to get addressed, I would encourage you to consult a human resources professional or an employment lawyer to address your specific situation. And now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today. We have Lynn Brown, who's the Managing Director of Brown Consulting Group. She's a certified human resources leader and a certified management consultant with over 30 years of experience practicing in the industry. Kyle Burgess is with us. He's been practicing employment law since 2008 and has helped clients with various employment-related issues such as contract disputes, constructive dismissals, employment standards violations, and more. He's very involved in the community and in fact is vice chair for the Newmarket Chamber of Commerce Board. And we have Chris Emanuel, who's the Director of Operations for Tree Frog Interactive. And Tree Frog is one of York Region's leading firms in digital transformation services. Chris has led Tree Frog's response to the challenges of the pandemic. He's also a devoted community member and works on quite a wide number of not-for-profit boards. And in his words, is a recovering politician. So we're delighted to have you with us all today. And I'd like to ask Lynn if she would like to get started.
That's great. I'd be delighted. Thanks, Karen. So let me just share my screen here. There we go. All good there?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, great. So I'm delighted to be here with everybody today to talk to you. And I wanted to talk really about two key issues. One is managing remotely, and the other one is employees returning to work. So like when COVID-19 happened, this was very much new territory, I think, for just about everybody. And although some employers had work from home policies, a lot didn't, and it's really been a shift and a learning experience for both employers and employees. In our experience, we've had clients expressing concerns, not only in the beginning when everybody was trying to figure out what to do, but now continuing as challenges have come up, particularly with employees who are working from home. And the three major concerns that are coming up is employee productivity, employee engagement, and employee mental health. So from a productivity perspective, and this is particularly if you don't have a work from home policy or practice, you may be concerned about what your employees are doing all day. And this is especially true if you don't have anything to kind of actively measure productivity. So that would be things like call volume or project deliverables. And also employees who may have been very dependent upon interacting with clients or customers, and if that volume is down for you, then they may also not be working at full capacity either. So the second thing is employee engagement. And working remotely, it can be really hard to determine how engaged your employees are when you're not seeing them every day. For some, working from home may be a very negative shift. And this flows very much into the next concern, which is on employee employee mental health. So employees may be feeling very isolated if they're working at home, particularly if they're also living alone, or they may have young children at home, or they have a spouse who's perhaps laid off, and then could be potential financial issues around that. And then overall, the pandemic, which has been going on for months and looks like it's going to be continuing in a modified work situation for some time. And because of these things, they can all be struggling with depression and stress, and both of those things can significantly impact employee engagement and employee productivity. There was a recent study that was done by CAMH that showed that there are increases in individuals who are feeling more depressed. And this was particularly higher with individuals who were between the ages of 18 and 39, and those who had children at home under the age of 18. And an interesting factor in this in the study was that they said 24% of respondents have stated that they were drinking more now because of the pandemic. And there's also many that are just generally feeling the overall stress of job security, not really knowing what's going to happen. So overall, so what are some of the things that you can do about it? So I think one of the important things is you have to look at your employees and their working styles. Think about those that may be working at home more effectively than others, and there could be good reasons for that. So, for example, there's a lot of assessments out there that measure people's temperament and the way that they work. Now I'm not suggesting that you go out and assess all of your employees, but a lot of the assessments, however, are similar in what they measure. And one of the things that they often look at is whether the individual is an extrovert or an introvert. And I'm using air quotes around those. So in this context, I'm going to ask you not to think about the definitions in the traditional sense, but in the context of how these assessments are. So in this, an extrovert would be a person that really likes being around people and kind of gets their recharge from people. That's really how they thrive. So you may see this if you have some top salespeople, or it could be an employee, a person who really loves the people side of their job and they're always interacting with others. You might see someone in your office who's like really effective at working a room. So that's kind of where the introvert would go. Whereas an extrovert would be a person that gets their recharge from being all alone. So, when they can kind of regroup. So a full day of Zoom meetings for an introvert type of person is going to be exhausting. So again, and I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush here, but if you, for example, have a sales force that is generally out with clients and are now all stuck working from home, or someone who's in the office whose job interacts or has a lot of collaboration with a lot of their coworkers during the day, working from home may be more challenging for them than if, for example, you have a team of researchers who are happily working at home with no interruptions. So you have to take those things into consideration when you're assessing how productive people are. On top of that, there's the individual stressors. So the individual could now have responsibilities for looking after their children during the day, and that could make it really difficult to do their work. We're hearing recently that many parents are struggling with what to do about sending their children back to school. And do they want to stay home with them as opposed to coming back to work? Some is going to be doing homeschooling, and that's going to also interrupt schedules. And we have a consultant here who at the beginning of the year, she would work virtually and also be out at clients. And her children were sent home like everyone else's. And then she had to do homeschooling. And then her husband, his organization transitioned off. So she said everybody was at home and the whole dynamic changed, and it was really hard for her to get her work done. I think the other thing that you really need to look at is what your organization needs by way of deliverables and productivity. So as Karen said, every workplace is different. And just as your individual employees have different needs, you're going to need to determine currently what your levels of productivity are and how you can measure it, and perhaps what types of adjustments you need to make it work for both you and your remote workforce. And thinking about it, these really are unprecedented times. So it's ideal if you can try and work in partnership with your employees. So let's talk about some of the key strategies that you can use to manage remotely. It's really important to set expectations. So if you can, try and develop some clear policies and practices, and think about the things you want to include in that. How do you want people to work and be available? How do you want them to communicate with you? How is work going to be tracked? How are people now going to collaborate with one another? I mean, not everyone was immediately set up to have their organization work virtually. We had a number of clients who had to do things like go get laptops for everybody so they could have them work off site. There's really no standard. So it's really what is going to work best for your organization. But setting the expectations is really important. And if you haven't done that, you can still do that and lay some good groundwork, especially if things are getting a little bit off track. It's important to regularly reassess how it's working for both you and your employees, and talk to them about their concerns and try and resolve any of their issues. So many of our clients say to me, you know, if they just told me, we would have been able to resolve this. But in my experience, many employees are reluctant to bring issues forward to their boss because of fear of losing their job. So if you have kind of a philosophy and a culture that really encourages people to come forward, then I would suggest that you keep encouraging them to do that even when they're off site, and to try and talk about things for them that may make working remotely better. It could be something as easy as a slight change in meetings or a schedule. We had a client who had a twice weekly meeting that started at 9 o'clock, and they had one employee that was consistently late for it. And you know, they called and said, "What do we do?" And I said, "Well, find out why." And it was quite simple, is that she was a new mother and she had a baby, and the baby's feeding schedule was at 9 o'clock, and it didn't necessarily jive. So with a very easy switch, they moved the meeting to 9:30, and it works for everybody now. In doing this, particularly when you don't have people that are right there with you, the most important thing to do is to keep communicating. So if you're not seeing them every day, connect regularly. We have a client who schedules their meetings at 9 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and 4 o'clock. So it makes sure that everybody's there for the core hours and is checking in, and by doing that, it keeps everybody on their toes, even their 4 o'clock on Friday meeting, just to wrap up the week. You also have to think about, with respect to communication, about those employees. So that can be the extroverts, or others that may be more junior, or those that you think may need some more direction. Those people who perhaps are say project-based or worked well on their own, they might not need as much direction as the others. So you have to look at your employees and figure out what they need. And I think one really important thing that people often don't think about is you. You may be the one who's managing all of this. You're going to have to put in some extra time to communicate, more so than when you would have to, perhaps, if everybody was on site. So you're managing employees remotely, and you're still doing your job. And you're also not immune to the stressors of COVID-19. So it's important to check in, make sure you're doing your own self-care, and not be mindful of taking on too much. And the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was returning to work. And there's really kind of one key thing that employees have been raising about returning to work, and that's, is my workplace safe? So as I'm sure you know, employers have a duty to provide a workplace that's safe. So you'll need to plan and implement any adjustments that are required to your workplace. And this could be anything from how you're going to social distance, workstations, or having people, you know, if they're working together, if they're not at workstations, personal protective equipment, cleaning and sanitizing, and how you deal with customers. There are some really good resources on what you can do depending upon your industry that's on the Government of Ontario website, and to help you get ready to have your workplace all set up for when your employees do return. And we've got a handout that Karen's going to send out, and the link is on there that you can use. To help alleviate employee stress when they are coming back to work, It's again important to continue to communicate what you've done, whether you're realigning workstations or moving people, providing plexiglass screens, staggering shifts, cleaning protocols, any of those things. It's important to tell them what you're doing because the unknown for them can be very stressful. Providing it in writing helps to make it clear and make sure that everyone's on the same page. Several clients, we've done welcome back documents for them that sort of say, you know, here's the new process and steps and here's all the things that's going to happen. And they send those out in advance of people coming back. And it certainly has alleviated a lot of questions and stress. And the final thing is you should also address any employees' concerns who are returning, particularly if they feel that they are compromised from a health perspective, or if they have a family member who is compromised. And if that's the case, perhaps an accommodation may be required in that. So just quickly to summarize, each workplace is different. So determine the plan that's going to work best for you and your employees and review and realign as you need to. Consider what your employees may be dealing with when they're working remotely, whether that be childcare or financial stress or the isolation of working alone. Be understanding and supportive because happier employees are more productive. Have a plan in place to return to work and keep the lines of communication open. That's really, really key. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Lynn, thank you so much. That was really terrific. I'd like to just say as well that the CAMH study that Lynn referenced, I put the URL in the chat. And also last week's YRBiz seminar, we had representatives from Workplace Safety and Workplace Safety Prevention Services. They provide free services to companies that have less than 50 employees. So if you're looking for some assessments of your workplace, if you're looking for guidelines by industry sector on how you can ensure your workplace is safe, by all means, check out the recording from last week. And we also had some designs of office layouts that could also be of use. So thank you, Lynn, for sharing your expertise. That's fantastic. And I'd like to ask Kyle now if you'd like to share from an employment law perspective what you're seeing and hearing in the business community.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Karen. And hello, everybody. I'm slowly getting used to doing these speaking engagements where I can't actually see the people that I'm speaking to. It's becoming normal, I suppose, but in an indirect way, very nice to meet you all who are attending this speaking engagement. And thank you for letting me sit on this panel of speakers. Where do I start from employment law with COVID-19 and businesses opening back up? It is a tremendously huge area of focus right now with respect to businesses opening up, handling all the different questions that arise and all the different new ways that they're arising or brand new things that are arising in the employee-employer relationships and at the workplaces. I could probably talk all afternoon, and I'm sure Karen could agree with that when I was speaking to her on the phone and about this speaking engagement of how much can be covered. What I'd like to focus upon, I think, just for the few moments I have to speak, is something that is quite topical right now because it's coming up in about 2 weeks now with the return to school opening back up and the impact that that's going to potentially have on a lot of businesses and a lot of questions that come up with that. Really, how much does it bleed into the protected ground under the Ontario Human Rights Code of family status? So sort of as a quick 101 on employment, on family status under the Human Rights Code. Family status is it's the status of being in a parent-child relationship is what family status is in a nutshell. And employers have to ensure that they don't discriminate against an employee or any of their employees as a result of an employee being in such, having a family status obligations towards a child. And they also have to make sure that they accommodate their employees as a result of an employee having family status obligations. And this is obviously something that's been around as a protected ground for years. It's not something brand new in the pandemic world of COVID-19. It existed before, and there's a lot of case law decisions out there with respect to family status. And so what COVID-19 has done, though, is that it's really highlighted it amongst a lot of other areas in employment law that didn't get as much attention as prior things such as wrongful terminations and so forth. Family status is really something that's been focused upon. If not on the forefront, it's always there in the background with everything that's been happening. However, with schools reopening and other businesses opening up at the same time and opening up further and things like daycares opening up and so forth, there is this question of family status obligations and an employer's obligation to accommodate an employee on such grounds. If we rewind the clock back to March, when March break and the provincial government closed the schools, the public sector schools. Family status was there. However, this was happening at the same time, or I should say, sorry, family status concerns were there for employers, but at the same time, a lot of actual businesses were shut down as well. So with children not being at school and daycares not being open, there was a lot of employees that were not physically going into the workplace, while that is because the business was actually closed temporarily due to COVID-19, or the business was able to operate remotely. Now, in circumstances where the business was able to operate remotely, meaning employees working from home, and if that employee did have a child or children that they were looking after, there was still family status obligations that could arise and accommodation needs as such. And Lynn in her presentation certainly touched upon something that I would say was a family status, potentially a family status obligation with respect to a meeting at 9 a.m. and moving it to 9:30. So you can see how these things in a remote working scenarios were still there. But now with businesses opening back up, especially in the summer months, it's a little bit similar to what we were experiencing in previous years without a pandemic, where you have parents who have to go to work in the summer while children are at home and not at school. But there were camps open. There were other things that could be engaged in so that the children were looked after while the parent or parents went off to work. So over the summer, we have still experienced this sort of family status situation as a result of COVID-19. But the school situation that's arriving in a couple weeks produces a new sort of landscape for employment law questions regarding family status and the obligations, and if there are any obligations in certain scenarios to accommodate. As I'm sure everyone is aware, there's the Ontario government has allowed schooling to either be done in person or all online, and it left it to parents to choose what was right for them in those circumstances. And in either of those avenues, because we're not dealing with a non-pandemic world, there can still be circumstances that arise where employees are not going to be able to necessarily return to work in the same capacity they were, such as last September. For parents who have elected to have their children or child return to the physical school, there may not be as much space capacity, or businesses may not be open that could have been providing before and after care obligation support for the child. And if you have a parent who works 9 to 5, but the school is 8:30 to 3:30, and there's no before after care for that child to go to in some way, you can see that even a child who is going to physically be going back to the school, there could arise a situation whereby there needs to be accommodation provided by an employer to address this family status obligation. The real interesting question becomes, though, from accommodating a family status obligation, the interesting question that is to be seen is the scenarios where parents who are employees have elected that children are not going back to school and that they're doing their work from home. How much of that, or is that at all, again, depending on the circumstance, a family status obligation that requires accommodation by the employer? Anyone who has ever dealt with the legal system before or ever spoken with a lawyer before, I'm sure they're used to hearing the words, it depends, the circumstances depend, the context depends. It's always that case because it's ultimately true. What will be one case in one situation will not be the same case in another situation. But you can think of scenarios whereby parents perhaps have elected that their children are not returning to the physical school for a justifiable reason that extends just beyond their own personal decision and personal comfort level on things. Perhaps there is an individual who lives in the same household as the children and the parent who could be, their health could be highly compromised if they were to contract COVID-19. If this were the case, it opens up a new suggestion of a form of accommodation, even more so for this employer-employee relationship that could be affected by this. And so while we're taking a look at all these different ways that circumstances can unfold as a result of family status obligations and accommodations, we keep on finding ourselves in uncharted territory that we're trying to navigate because we haven't had a situation before whereby for example, the school system is something that can be done fully online or in person, and it being elected by the parent. And then if they do elect to do it online, presumably at the home, and if the child needs to have supervision of any sort, be it, for example, their age, does this, and if this is the only decision, there's no other reason for the decision to be chosen to do the schooling at home, does that trigger a family status accommodation obligation on behalf of the employer-employee relationship because it was a choice by the parent? This is where we're starting to get into some real uncharted territory because it's unfortunately a very unique situation that everyone is having to face. What is probably the most prudent course to take on this is that an employer needs to ensure that they're attentive to what their employees are saying. That when their employees come to them and they're discussing what is going to happen, whether it be as a result of returning to school, a daycare situation, or anything when it comes to what might possibly be a form of accommodation that's needed as a result of something affected by everything by COVID-19 here, an employer really should make sure that they're listening to it, that they have a discussion with their employees about it, that they contemplate whether or not this is something that can be accommodated. And if it can be accommodated, can it only be done so with undue hardship on the employer, which is the threshold that an employer has to accommodate to. And if the employer doesn't have those answers, if the employer is unsure, because again, we're dealing with a lot of uncharted territory here, seek the guidance and counsel from a lawyer on the topic to make sure that it's properly being addressed. And always remember that how one circumstance was addressed does not mean that's how the other circumstance can be addressed as well. And that goes for all accommodation of all protected grounds on the under the Human Rights Code in Ontario. And so it's going to be raising a lot of questions. It's going to be raising a lot of circumstances that employers and employees, in all fairness, have never had to address before, and seeing what sort of common ground can be reached. I think that we naturally go to the easy examples. We naturally go to an easy example where somebody has, for example, elected to have their children stay home to do schooling from home, and that parent or the parents work a job that allows them to continue to work remotely, and we say no problem, then in that case then the employee can just continue to work remotely and everything's fine. But we are all very cognizant of the fact that there are many jobs out there that they cannot be performed remotely, and that there's a lot of shift work that people do, and that with the schooling system having these different choices of how it can operate, it can create a lot of hurdles that need to be addressed in a proper way by the employees and employers in the relationship to make sure that everyone is properly accommodated when accommodation is needed. The one other point that I wanted to bring up in the couple of minutes I have left here is the from a family status standpoint is how employers need to be cognizant of the fact that there may be, and I'm projecting here, but there may be a lot more absences from school for children who are actually physically attending school. There may be a lot more absences that actually take place depending upon how strict schools are going to be and the boards are going to be when it comes to people who are showing any sort of COVID-19 symptoms. From the literature that I've seen to date on it, that anyone showing any symptoms, the child is to stay home from school. And employers need to be cognizant of this. With an employee who has to physically go to the workplace and do their job versus being able to work remotely and doing their job, we may have a lot more circumstances than normally happens during flu seasons and cold seasons when parents wake up and say, oh, I can't go into work today because my child is unwell, I have to stay home and look after them. There may be circumstances where it's a much more lesser of a symptom that normally parents wouldn't keep their kids home from school, but now they're going to be required to under the certain pandemic that we're in. And the accommodation, depending on the circumstance, that employers are going to need to provide their employees, as well as, and let's not forget, when that accommodation is provided, the employer still being able to have to try to make ends meet at the workplace to make their job function. So these are the hurdles that I'm seeing that are going to be coming up when the schools do reopen, and as businesses continue to open up further and further as well.
Wow, that's great, Kyle. Thanks so much. I'm going to ask you a question, but only because you might need some time to look into it before we come to the Q&A session. Is there a resource that employers can reference for accessing the most current information on accommodation and employment law? So where do you go to sort of keep track of these things as things are evolving? And I'll leave that with you to answer, think about and answer when we come to the Q&A session.
Not a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know return to school is top of mind for everybody right now, and the questions about what the fall will bring for us. So I'd like to ask Chris now, if you'd like to share a little bit about Tree Frog's approach and what have you been doing with your employees and how you're addressing it?
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen, and all the other panelists as well. So I'll put it in some context quickly for those that don't know Tree Frog. So we have about 40, just shy of 40 employees. We're based in Newmarket. We're a digital marketing company. We, in fact, did not have to send all our employees home back in March, but we made a decision to send them home because, well, frankly, if we're a digital marketing company, we can't work remotely. There's challenges there, but we've done, I think, well in that regard. But I've certainly discovered some things. We've made improvements, but we have really been focused, and to the previous comments, it's all about communication with our staff, and I think that helps alleviate some of the mental stress associated with this, which I would argue, not to mitigate the physical well-being, but we know just statistically we're in relatively good shape in York Region. So our focus has primarily been mental health over the last number of months. And again, because we're nothing without our staff, as I'm sure most employees are, and that's really our primary focus. So the first thing I'd suggest is that any organization should be creating an operational plan that speaks to a number of the things that Lynn and Kyle have both spoke about. And I think so what's critical in this is having that operational plan is sharing that plan with your employees. I think this is a time when transparency is critical, and making sure that everyone is understanding what you as an employer are doing to help, again, mitigate the mental stress and the physical as you return to work. And those are some of the items that I believe should be captured in an operational plan. And I think these are the questions that any organization should be answering, and it's what our plan does as well. And it's I believe if you are answering these questions, you're going to address a lot of your employees' concerns. So, because a lot of employees are not necessarily worried about themselves and how their family or bubble are interacting. Rather, they might be concerned about the employee that sits next to them, or down the hallway and things like that. So, by having these plans and sharing them and being very open about it, I think you're going to go a long way to addressing some of the concerns that may come up from some of your staff. I'll share this this has kind of been evolving a bit. Again, I indicated we didn't necessarily have to close our office in the various phases, but we made a decision in March to close and have everyone working remotely. And then as kind of each phase was announced and the details around the phase, we examined it and we thought, you know what, we're going to wait till Labor Day and then we're going to commence a 60-day period where employees for that period between September 8th and November 8th will actually be able to choose where they work. They won't hear from me or our CEO or any other manager, but why weren't you in the office, whatnot. We're giving them total flexibility because, you know, Kyle raised some really critical comments around school, back to school, and things like that. There's going to be a lot of families adjusting to that. And so, you know, I get that not every business has this luxury, but we want to put our employees in the position where they're not worried about those things. And I think if you're an employer that has that luxury, you should avail yourself of it because you're going to create just a better, I think, environment from, again, a mental health standpoint. I'll be candid, we're going to evaluate what the post 60-day period looks like. You know, if COVID cases go up in York Region, Ontario, we may extend that period. And what kind of day 61 goes forward looks like, we're certainly going to be integrating greater work from home for our staff. And we still believe we're creative office, our staff are great when they are collaborating, and it's just not the same over, you know, Zoom and Slack. But at the end of the day, we are going to recognize that we probably do need to shift to having greater flexibility going forward on work from home. And then again, we're all, like I sent an update to our staff yesterday on what kind of September 8th looks like and beyond, and I'll give staff updates as we get more information. Again, our biggest focus has been mental health, and I'll be candid, I've had ups, I've had downs, as I'm sure many of you had, and I've seen it with our employees. And sometimes you can just see it in maybe a Zoom, it's the way they may be corresponding. You know, Lynn had noted that sometimes, you know, if an employee is coming late to meetings, have those conversations. And I think it's critical to, I'm having one-on-one meetings more with our staff than ever before. If you've got access to an EAP, make sure they're aware of it, how they can use it, etc. You know, we have something on Fridays called Learn O'Clock every Friday from 4 to 5. And in the past, we'd be training sessions, sharing some things. But a lot of our Learn O'Clocks over the last few months have just been social. Just our staff talking to each other, connecting, you know, having a few laughs. Some of our staff have discovered some great game websites where we've played group games over an hour. But, you know, they're missing that interaction in the office. And especially our company, it's a creative company. We want people engaging and interacting with each other. And I think we're richer for it. And we're going to do what we can to continue that. I've also brought in a guest speaker recently all about, you know, motivating our employees about the role that they have. We brought in a guest speaker on, you know, that was actually one of our employees' fiancés who talked about ergonomics in the workplace, and especially working from home, because fortunately not all employees are sitting at, you know, a desk, or some are sitting at their kitchen island or in their bed or their couch and things like that. So we want to make sure we're looking out for their physical health as well. And we're doing everything we can to educate. You know, with respect to physical health, you know, we want to have an understanding of clear policies. And the one thing we've, you know, and I sent out another note to our staff today, if you're sick, not even if you have COVID symptoms, because we recognize that, you know, some may not be related, don't come to the office. Like, do not come, talk to me, and then we'll talk about what return to work, what looks like. You know, it might be a 14-day period, it might be a whatever. We're going to do it on a kind of case-by-case basis. And make sure that, you know, always reminding people about what the symptoms look like. But I was listening to CBC radio yesterday morning, and they're saying, I think right now the statistic is 45% of people that have COVID are asymptomatic. So this is where, and I'll get into this in a moment, it's critical from a physical distancing standpoint, what your organization is doing to protect your employees' health and well-being. We're making sure that there's a laser thermometer there. Not everyone might have a thermometer at home, things like that. We're trying to make this as simple as possible for our staff, so they don't necessarily need to put a lot of deep thought into it, that there'll be masks there for them to use. we're having disposable masks, but as well, we bought them all some, cloth masks and whatnot. They're all Tree Frog branded green. We just want to make sure we make this as easy as possible for our staff. And I think that's critical for any employer. One of the things is tomorrow we've got our furniture manufacturer coming in. We've replaced some of our desks that weren't previously distanced or didn't have the spacing. Every workstation we've now evaluated has at least the 6 feet distancing. We've got glass panels in place, making sure that we're protecting everyone. Because again, go back to that, asymptomatic group where if it's about 45%, you need to make sure you're doing everything you can as employer, because just think of what would happen if someone on your staff gets COVID, contracts it, spreads it. I think at the end of the day, you want to make sure you've done everything you can to create the safest environment. We have very clear signs up now in front of every meeting room, what the occupancy is. Make it easy as possible for everyone to understand that, a room that previously sat 8 staff members, I've now put an occupancy at 3 people. And I think you have to have those things clearly posted to make it as easy as possible. We've also got clear guidelines on guests coming into the office, clients, etc. We want to minimize that over that kind of 60-day phase and period. And again, communicate that to your staff. We've tasked our cleaners with doing intense cleanings, but we've put hand sanitizer on every desk as of when staff are coming back, clean desk policy. We're making it easier for everyone, disinfectants everywhere, every meeting room, etc. And again, it's just, we're trying to do everything we can to mitigate any spread in our office. Just a couple high levels, and I'm sure many employers are evaluating things. A lot of our staff during COVID didn't take vacation because there were limited options, beyond those that might have owned cottages and things like that. So we've actually been very clear with our staff that, we're looking at, whereas we had a clear policy on our vacation usage, and carryover, et cetera, we're having greater flexibility because I've looked at the numbers, statistically, we're lower on vacation usage up until this point. So make sure as an employer, you're at least communicating that, you're putting thought into it, right? If you've got and talk to an HR consultant on making sure that you've got the right procedures in place if you're making these kinds of changes, et cetera. Travel, we have, some of our employees may want to be traveling, and that is not just a question for them, but again, the person that sits beside them, if, Sally goes away somewhere, they want to know, like, how's Sally being handled? So we have very clear policies on how we're handling anyone that's kind of traveling, et cetera. And the one thing I've made abundantly clear to our staff is that if you have any unique situation like daycare, schooling, things like that, talk to me. We'll find a way to accommodate. And again, we're going to do everything we can to address those physical challenges they may have on being available or mental health as well. And the one thing we did too on productivity is we have our daily huddle where every staff member joins via Zoom, video, et cetera. Everyone sees each other. We have Slack as an internal communications tool where we have, people they let people know when they're in for the day. They let people know when they're out for the day. If they're stepping out to grab lunch or have a break, they post that in an absent channel, et cetera. And it's because these are things you'd see if you were all working in the same office, but you're not. And so we're trying to make it as best as possible for colleagues working together. And again, because we're a family, we're a small business, we're just asking that everyone to be careful about what they're doing outside the office. Obviously, we can't mandate these things, but we're just asking people to put that lens on, to think about their colleague as a family member. Don't go to big concerts when they're eventually at, things like that, but talk to us, right? And if there's, it's this kind of personal appeal. Again, it's not enforceable really, but and I think it's been well received by our staff because I think, again, they view each other as family, and it's been helpful. And I'll just share, the province of Ontario has provided great links if, you know, we have a great design team, so we've done some custom posters and things like that. But there's all kinds of guides, templates, and things like that on the Ontario government website, and I encourage any employer to draw from those. And again, some examples, just again, over communicate what your internal policies are and how you're handling things. And I think we'll all be, your employees will all be better for it. So that's it.
Great, Chris, thanks so much for sharing great information. So we have a few minutes for questions very quickly. One of the questions that was in the poll, and it got some responses that we didn't address, was how do employers approach changing hours and pay? So if you're in a cash flow issue, or your volume of sales is going down, I'm not sure if this is best addressed to Lynn or to Kyle, but how would you recommend employers deal with those situations where they may need to renegotiate or reduce hours or pay for their employees?
Well, my response to that would be sort of tongue-in-cheek, very carefully. No, I think that it can be a tough discussion to be had. But in this sort of environment that we're in, with a lot of businesses and with profits being low for a lot of businesses and having a hard time from a revenue standpoint, it's a necessary conversation. And I think that that's potentially, in the right circumstances, the right way to go about doing it is to have this conversation with the employees, and it would depend on your own workplace if that's a group discussion or individual discussion. I would more so be leaning towards an individual discussion, and letting the company know, letting the employee or employees know what's happening, what the rationale is for this, and seeking their agreement to it is sort of your path of least resistance that can happen on it. But it may not turn out to be where you want it to be at the end of that conversation, and that's when things can get a lot more difficult in the circumstances, and that's normally when I get a telephone call at that point normally.
Right. Okay. Lynn, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, actually, and kind of going with what Kyle said, I think it's important for the whole aspect to be, it depends. And so I would always look at, if I was an employer, I would want to look at all of the different factors. And frankly, I would want to get counsel, ideally from an employment lawyer, before I started having the conversations, because you could be dealing with someone who is a long-term employee versus a short-term employee by things that could be in their employment contract. And I think it's really important to make sure that you've checked before you have the conversations. And generally, an employment lawyer can guide you in the best way to have that and what you need to do to go forward.
Great, thanks, Lynn. So Kyle, I threw you a question before, which was, okay, so things are changing, there's no precedence. What should employers do? Is there a good website that sort of has best practices? Where do they go?
Yeah, it's there aren't a lot of decisions coming out right now to sort of help us with the navigating this uncharted territory, just with the status of the courts and that. One place that I would certainly direct people to is, and it seems like a bit of a self-plug, but I'll say it, is our firm's website. We constantly keep up to date with changing circumstances of COVID-19 related to employment law. I did hear, I think it was Lynn who had mentioned about the government website that indicated about recommendations for different things at the different types of workplaces in different industries. I've seen those. I think they're great. When it comes to human rights, even just to get a real sort of baseline understanding of things to help out with, because they have to be written very general. The Human Rights Commission has which is a website that has some really good guidance on each one of the different areas, including family status and that. I would say that those are probably the best places to go to. Otherwise, there isn't too much that's come out, and we're dealing with a lot of unknown things. So I think that would probably be where I would direct people to begin with.
Okay, Lynn, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think, I mean, I've certainly have referenced the Ontario Human Rights website. One of the challenges with using that website is, like, they'll give you information, but then you have to try and interpret what the legislation is, and you can't kind of plug in an answer and get it. And the challenge is as an employer, they won't provide you information as an employer. Like, it's there, but if you call, they will if you're an employee. So again, because these things are so challenging with accommodation, everything is different. Just as Kyle was talking about with family status, everything is so unique. I think you know, like as Kyle said, maybe use his website or other websites that may be able to provide it. But if you have a specific situation, best to get some counsel before you do it. Otherwise, you can really get yourself into trouble.
Right. Well, great advice. Thank you very much for that. We're coming up to time, so I want to just take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers for sharing their insights and expertise with us today. And a quick reminder that we will be communicating with you within the next 24 hours. And that email will include a link to this recording, as well as the copies of presentations used by Lynn and Chris, as well as the handout from Lynn. So thank you to everybody for your time, and thank you for joining us. If you are available next Thursday from 12 to 1, our next session is going to be a fascinating one with Environics Analytics, where they are going to take a look at two areas in York Region, the Vaughan Metropolitan Center area and Main Street Newmarket, and show how you can tap into mobile data to see how people's movements have changed pre-pandemic to now. And this could be really helpful for businesses to be able to understand those changing patterns and adjust their business plans accordingly. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I will wish everybody a great rest of the day. And thank you again for joining us. We're delighted to have you here. Thanks, everybody.